So these Reaper drones are on the hunt right now in Mexico. They're covertly looking for these criminal cartel organizations and their fentanyl labs.
Now that this cartel operatives in Mexico say the word about being arrested or even killed as Trump cracks down on our southern border.
The Sinaloa Cartel is in full-blown crisis mode, and the CIA might be pulling the strings. Once feared as the kings of the drug trade, cartel leaders are disappearing without a trace, drug labs are going up in smoke, and panic is spreading like wildfire. It all started when 11 Green Berets touched down in Mexico for a so-called training program. But the real game changer? A classified CIA operation deploying MQ-9 Reaper drones and, if the rumors are true, an elite black ops team hunting cartel operatives in the shadows. Culiacán, the cartel's stronghold, is no longer safe. High-profile arrests, relentless raids, and nonstop seizures have left the organization scrambling. Even cartel insiders admit they're living in fear. One operative even said, "You can't be calm, you can't sleep, because you don't know when they'll catch you." The most important thing now is to survive. Is this the beginning of the end for Sinaloa? Or is a brutal counterattack already brewing? One thing's for sure, the war is far from over. Let's get into it. The CIA has been secretly flying drones over Mexico to spy on drug cartels, gathering intel on their operations, and possibly gearing up for something bigger. These MQ-9 Reaper drones are the same ones used in military strikes against terrorists in Somalia, Iraq, and Syria, and they are mapping cartel hideouts and drug labs just across the US border. And while they're technically unarmed right now, they can be fitted with missiles if needed.
And they're not currently armed, but they can actually carry payloads for precision strikes. This is a move, though, that has been used by the U.S. to target suspected terrorists in other countries. We're talking about Syria and Iraq. But the CIA has not been authorized to use the drones to take lethal action.
Trump has been pushing for this for years, saying the U.S. needs to wage war on cartels. And with drones already in the sky, some believe it's only a matter of time before they're locked and loaded.
Look, if the cartels won't surrender or stop, then the next step is Trump will start to drop drones on them. And I fully expect that might happen.
The U.S. has been using drones in Mexico since the early 2000s, helping in major cartel busts like the capture of El Chapo in 2014. When he escaped from prison the following year, U.S. drones were back in the air, tracking his every move. But things got messy when actor Sean Penn and Kate Del Castillo planned to meet El Chapo for an interview, forcing officials to call off a major raid. Fast forward to 2023, and drone surveillance reportedly played a key role in tracking down Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman, during a massive shootout with cartel forces. But this new wave of drone activity, it's different. Congress was quietly notified about the increased flights through covert channels, the same way the CIA handles top-secret operations. And here's the kicker, Mexico wasn't even mentioned. That's a huge red flag that the US might be planning to act without Mexico's involvement. When questioned, the CIA stayed vague, only saying that fighting the cartels is a top priority and that Director Ratcliffe is using the agency's unique expertise to handle the situation. But let's be real, that's just government speak for, "We're not telling you anything." Unsurprisingly, Mexico isn't happy about the situation. Their defense secretary, Ricardo Trevilla, admitted that while the drones haven't officially crossed into Mexican airspace, he can't confirm they're not spying. Translation: he has no clue what the US is really up to. And given the long history of US-Mexico tensions, this could turn into a major diplomatic nightmare. But President Claudia Sheinbaum is taking a slightly different approach. She confirmed that US surveillance drones are operating over Mexican territory, but according to her, it's all above board. She insists these missions are coordinated with the Mexican government and are part of a joint effort to locate and shut down fentanyl labs in northwestern Mexico. Sheinbaum even made a point to say that every single US operation happens at Mexico's request, and all intel gathered is shared with Mexican authorities. So why the sudden teamwork? Trump's pressure. Since taking office, Trump has been relentless about cracking down on fentanyl trafficking, which is flooding into the US at alarming rates. To push Mexico into action, he threatened a 25% tariff on Mexican imports, a move that could have seriously damaged their economy. But at the last minute, he held off and took a different route, designating several major cartels as terrorist organizations. Mexico didn't waste any time responding. To avoid economic chaos, they deployed 10,000 National Guard troops to the northern border and ramped up their cartel crackdown. And it's actually working. The Sinaloa Cartel is feeling the pressure. Then, On February 17th, things got even more interesting. The US sent in the Green Berets from the 7th Special Forces Group for a 6-week joint training mission with Mexico's Naval Infantry Marines. Their focus? Counter-narcotics tactics, intelligence sharing, and stopping illegal gun trafficking from the US to Mexico. According to the border report, these elite operators arrived fully armed, but their official mission is just training. But let's be real, some people aren't buying the just training narrative. The 7th Special Forces Group is known for its deep experience in Central and South America, and their motto is literally De Oppresso Liber, or Free the Oppressed. So naturally, there's speculation that they've got a little side mission going on. Could we start seeing cartel bosses mysteriously dropping like flies? Time will tell. Meanwhile, Mexico's crackdown is already making waves. Since October, authorities have made nearly 900 arrests in Sinaloa, including some major cartel figures. One of the biggest takedowns? Jose Angel Canobio, aka El Güerito, Little Blonde One, who was reportedly in charge of security for El Chapo's son, Ivan Archivaldo Guzman. Another big name taken down? Kevin Alonso Gil Acosta, also known as El 200, or El Cabo. He was allegedly in charge of Los Chapitos' security operations, running arms trafficking, extortion, and violent attacks on law enforcement. And then there's Mauro Alejandro N., a pilot accused of helping smuggle Ismael El Mayo Zambada into U.S. custody against his will. These high-stakes takedowns have dealt a serious blow to the Los Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa Cartel. As you already know, Los Chapitos and La Mayiza have been locked in a brutal civil war, and now, the cartel's power structure is crumbling. With their leadership under attack, cartel operatives are scrambling. Some are selling off assets, while others are investing in high-tech counter-surveillance to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. The fentanyl trade has slowed in some areas, but experts warn this is just a temporary setback. Production isn't stopping, it's just moving somewhere else. Meanwhile, the streets of Culiacán paint a dark and heartbreaking picture. What was once a lively, bustling city has become a war zone, where violence is just part of daily life. The cartel's internal war has shattered any sense of stability, and fear hangs heavy in the air. One resident put it bluntly in an interview: Culiacán isn't what it used to be. The limits have been exceeded. We've never seen this many people dead. For 6 straight months, the violence has spread like wildfire across Sinaloa. Since September 2024, hundreds have been killed or vanished without a trace. Bodies are turning up everywhere, and carjackings and kidnappings have become so common that people barely flinch anymore. Roadblocks appear without warning, manned by heavily armed men who stop drivers and scan their phones for any sign of rival affiliations. Businesses are shutting down early, parents are tracking their kids' movements in real time, and funerals are happening on almost every street. People are too scared to leave their homes, praying they won't be the next target. One desperate resident pleaded, "I ask God that this all ends, that they come to an agreement. Why are they killing each other like life has no value?" And to think, it all started with the downfall of Ismael El Mayo Zambada. For 35 years, El Mayo was the ultimate ghost, outsmarting authorities, avoiding cameras, and never getting caught. But in July 2024, his luck ran out, not because of the government, but because of an inside betrayal. Turns out, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's son, cut a deal with US officials and set him up. El Mayo thought he was heading to northern Mexico to scout hidden airstrips. Instead, he walked straight into a trap. His lawyer later revealed that he was ambushed by 6 gunmen, kidnapped, and forced onto an aircraft.
On July 25th at this Culiacán ranch, El Mayo arrived with an armed security detail and drove down this road to meet El Chapo's son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, and some Mexican politicians. But tonight, according to this new jailhouse statement from El Mayo himself, he was ambushed, assaulted, knocked to the ground, a dark-colored hood pulled over his head. They tied me up, he claims, and handcuffed me. El Mayo says his bodyguards are MIA, and this politician, Hector Cuen, was gunned down. Mayo claims to have been driven across the Mexican city to a remote airstrip and put on a plane. This plane that landed a couple hours later in Texas, greeted by FBI agents.
When El Mayo was captured, it sent shockwaves through the cartel world, and the Mexican government knew what was coming. Officials braced for an all-out war, and sure enough, chaos erupted. The once powerful organization was at war with itself. On one side, you had Los Chapitos, led by El Chapo's sons, Ivan and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar. On the other, La Mayiza, controlled by El Mayo's son, Ismael Zambada Siqueiros. Innocent civilians were caught in the middle, and now, many are desperately hoping Trump's promised crackdown will finally put an end to the bloodshed. And that's the real shift here. People who once saw the cartels as a necessary evil are starting to turn against them. For years, many Mexicans didn't just tolerate the cartels, they depended on them. In regions where the government failed to provide even the basics, cartels stepped in. They handed out food, paid medical bills, and even provided security. Some built roads, churches, and schools, earning a Robin Hood-like reputation for taking from corrupt officials and giving back to the people. Figures like El Chapo Guzman weren't just feared, they were idolized. Songs, murals, and folklore painted him as a legend, a man who constantly outmaneuvered authorities. But his downfall changed everything. The new generation of cartel leaders, especially factions like Los Chapitos, aren't interested in playing the role of protectors. They're reckless, power-hungry, and ruthless. Where the old-school bosses maintained a certain order, these new leaders thrive on chaos and fear. The loyalty that once kept communities aligned with the cartels is starting to crumble. Business owners are being extorted for protection fees. Everyday people fear being caught in the crossfire. And in cities like Culiacán, parents no longer let their kids play outside. Yet, for some communities, the cartel's grip remains unbreakable, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. Corrupt politicians and weak law enforcement leave people vulnerable, forcing them to coexist with criminal power. But one thing is clear, the era of unwavering cartel support is fading, replaced by fear, exhaustion, and growing resentment. For decades, the Mexican government has tried just about everything when it comes to dealing with the cartels. From turning a blind eye to launching full-blown military crackdowns, their approach has shifted depending on who's in charge, how much pressure the US is applying, and the power struggles within the cartels themselves. Before the early 2000s, there was an unspoken agreement between the government and the cartels. Keep the violence under control, and we won't bother you. This so-called Pax Narca, narco peace, meant drug trafficking thrived, but open warfare was kept to a minimum. Politicians, police, and government officials were often on the cartel payroll, and as long as business kept running smoothly, the general public wasn't dragged into the chaos. That all changed in 2006 when President Felipe Calderón launched a full-scale war on drugs. He sent in the military, arrested cartel leaders, and worked closely with the US under the Merida Initiative. But instead of wiping out the cartels, this backfired spectacularly. Taking down cartel bosses created power vacuums, splitting these organizations into smaller, more violent groups that fought for control. The result? Violence exploded, with over 250,000 deaths and tens of thousands of disappearances linked to cartel-related conflicts. In 2012, President Enrique Peña Nieto pulled back on the military approach, focusing instead on reducing violence rather than going after cartel leaders. Some even say peace talks were quietly explored with certain groups. For a moment, this seemed to work. Homicide rates dipped, but behind the scenes, the cartels used this breathing room to expand into new crimes like kidnapping, extortion, and fuel theft. Alliances shifted, new rivalries formed, and before long, the violence returned. One of the biggest headlines during Peña Nieto's presidency was El Chapo Guzman's capture in 2016. At first, it seemed like a huge win for law enforcement, but instead of shutting down the Sinaloa Cartel, it threw the entire organization into chaos. With their leader behind bars, different factions fought for control, setting off a violent power struggle that only made things worse. Then came President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, who took a completely different approach. Instead of relying on military force, he focused on tackling the root causes of cartel violence, poverty, and lack of education. His motto, abrazos, no balazos, hugs, not bullets, summed up his belief that social programs would weaken the cartels over time. But the results? Not great. Despite AMLO's efforts to avoid direct confrontations, violence only escalated. Cartels became bolder than ever, openly defying the government. One of the biggest embarrassments was the 2019 Culiacán debacle, when the military captured Ovidio Guzman, El Chapo's son, only to release him hours later after cartel forces launched a full-blown siege on the city. AMLO argued that his decision was to prevent civilian casualties, but many saw it as a sign of weakness, proving that the government had lost control. Now, under President Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico is taking a more balanced approach, working closely with the US to track fentanyl fentanyl labs, while also using military force in strategic strikes. So far, there have been some wins. Increased drone surveillance, high-profile arrests, and military raids have disrupted cartel operations. But history has shown that these groups are masters of adaptation, and they're already changing tactics to stay ahead. As US and Mexican forces ramp up their use of drones to track fentanyl labs and cartel movements, the cartels are wasting no time in fighting back with counter-surveillance tactics. Reports suggest they're using signal jammers to scramble drone and GPS tracking, deploying spotters equipped with thermal imaging to detect incoming threats, and switching to encrypted communications to avoid wiretaps. They're not just relying on brute force anymore. They're adopting military strategies, refining their security protocols, and staying one step ahead of authorities.
Cartel del Noreste is actually using these device disruptors to counter U.S. drones. So what we can tell you here is that this alert states that the device can actually detect nearby unmanned aircraft systems. It can disrupt the signal between the operator and the drone. Now, this is what happens. The loss in signal will result in aircraft failure, and that drone will crash. Images shared that were found on a seized CDN member's cell phone are what you're looking at here right now. So how exactly do these work? Well, drone jammers send strong signals to the same frequency as a drone's control signals, which drowns out the communication between the drone and its operator. A clear problem, obviously, that causes the drone to lose control or become non-functional.
And it doesn't stop there. With law enforcement focusing heavily on fentanyl production in Sinaloa and Sonora, cartels are shifting their operations elsewhere. Intelligence suggests they're relocating fentanyl labs deeper into remote areas and even moving them across the border into Guatemala and Honduras, where surveillance is weaker. Smugglers are rerouting drug shipments through Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and some groups are downsizing their labs to make them more mobile and harder to detect. What's even more alarming is that both the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG are reportedly experimenting with new chemical formulas to create fentanyl analogs that could slip past current detection methods. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they're also branching into other criminal enterprises. Human trafficking and migrant smuggling have become major sources of revenue, with cartels controlling migration routes and charging desperate travelers exorbitant fees for safe passage. In places like Guerrero and Michoacán, they've muscled into illegal gold mining, extorting businesses and selling resources on the black market. Even cybercrime is now on their radar, with some groups funding hackers to steal financial data, run extortion schemes, and launder money through cryptocurrency. At the same time, the crackdown has triggered paranoia within cartel ranks. With high-profile arrests shaking up leadership structures, cartel bosses are tightening security, running loyalty tests, and eliminating anyone suspected of being an informant. Executions of traitors have skyrocketed, and security details have doubled in size. Many top figures refuse to travel without heavily armed convoys, fearing an ambush at any moment. Meanwhile, rival groups are taking full advantage of the chaos. La Mayiza is aggressively challenging Los Chapitos, using their internal instability to gain ground and escalate their bloody turf war. But what's really raising alarm bells for US officials is the growing risk of retaliation against American citizens. Security analysts warn that cartels may start targeting US businesses operating in Mexico, ramping up kidnappings, and escalating violent clashes with law enforcement. Several attacks on US Border Patrol agents have already been reported, with intel suggesting cartel leaders have officially authorized their foot soldiers to target American officials. Some reports even claim they've developed weaponized drones and explosives ready to deploy against US law enforcement at the southern border.
The cartels authorize the use of weaponized drones, explosives against CBP personnel and U.S. law enforcement down there at the southern border. Now, they're actually being encouraged, of course, to remain cognizant and vigilant, but they're also being encouraged to use their long arms. Like, I have never seen this in a CBP memo before.
Despite the latest U.S.-Mexico collaboration, the cartels are adapting faster than ever. They're using high-tech defenses, relocating operations, eliminating informants, and diversifying their criminal empire. While the crackdown has dealt heavy blows, it's clear that this war is far from over. But what do you think? Can Trump actually wipe out the cartels for good? Or will they just evolve and come back even stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take on this. And if you found this video eye-opening, check out our other deep dives. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update on this unfolding crisis.